When people think of ancient Rome, they often recall its magnificent architecture, the famous Roman roads, and various technological achievements. But they tend to overlook one key fact. In the 4th century BCE, the Roman state covered an area of only 10,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of islands like Cyprus or Jamaica. 2 centuries later, its territory had expanded to 800,000 square kilometers, surpassing modern-day France or Turkey. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman Empire's territory had grown to a staggering 5 million square kilometers, an area comparable to modern India, Mongolia, and the UK combined. That's even bigger than today's European Union. It's important to understand that the reason for such expansion was quite mercantile. The provinces brought in slaves, resources, and taxes. In these territories, Rome imposed taxes like the stipendium or tributum, essentially a head tax paid as a fee for being conquered. People were literally paying for the privilege of being subdued by Rome. On top of that, there was the tithe, a tax on land ownership, and various duties, which for instance brought in around a ton of silver annually from Sicily alone. Some regions were also required to send 25% of their annual harvest to Rome. Within a single province, tax systems could exist in dozens of combinations. The total tax burden on a territory could even exceed its annual income several times over. Viewing the Roman Republic and later the Empire as a unified state is misleading. It was more like Rome and a vast collection of conquered lands where systematic, legalized plunder thrived. Most people living in these territories were classified as peregrini, foreigners with no rights of Roman citizenship. As a result, there were dozens, possibly over 100 uprisings in the provinces, though no one has done an exact count. Historically, a state isn't just a tool for internal control, but also for external expansion, which eventually hits a wall when it encounters a stronger rival or collapses under its own contradictions. As the Roman saying goes, destroy money and you'll destroy wars. This could be complemented by a quote from Octavian Augustus: "Never start a battle or a war unless you're sure the victory will gain you more than the defeat will cost you." Rome, however, can be confidently called the leading aggressor and source of military conflicts in ancient Europe. Its territorial gains were built on the strength of its weapons, one of which was the well-known Pilum. It's hard to pinpoint who exactly invented this type of spear, as Roman authors attributed it to various peoples. Even the origin of the name is unclear. However, it seems this type of spear or javelin entered widespread use around the 4th century BCE. The pilum's tip resembled a metal rod, ranging in length from 20 to 95 centimeters and with a diameter of 7 to 10 millimeters, ending in a socket or tang for attaching it to the shaft. Together with the wooden shaft, the pilum was up to 2 meters long and weighed up to 2 kilograms. The figures of 5 kilograms circulating online are pure fantasy, as that's the weight of crowbar, not an object resembling rebar with a shaft. In ancient times, outside of Rome's professional army, the so-called barbarian peoples weren't well equipped with armor. As a result, shields played a massive role in a warrior's equipment. However, contrary to what many video games might suggest, shields weren't indestructible. They were often made of planks no more than 1 centimeter thick, essentially a disposable item. The Romans significantly improved shield durability by inventing plywood for their scutum shields. Even so, piercing an opponent's shield was no small challenge. That's where the pilum came in. According to experiments by historian Peter Connolly, a pilum weighing 1.7 kilograms with a pyramidal tip could pierce 11 millimeters of plywood and remain deeply embedded in it. For comparison, ancient bows were generally underwhelming in power. While Scythian archers could occasionally shoot arrows over 400 meters, their arrowheads weighed only a few grams. It's worth addressing a common claim. Some say pilum tips were deliberately made from soft metal so they would bend upon impact, making them harder to remove from shields and impossible to reuse quickly. Personally, in my view, there's no clever design behind this. A heavy pilum tip weighed around 600 to 700 grams, and a legionary could carry several of them, with additional supplies in the supply wagons. While the Romans could produce decent quality metal, pilum tips were likely made from the cheapest iron smelted in simple furnaces, with a low carbon content. If you made a thin blade from this material, it wouldn't perform well. However, a square or round rod, even of mediocre metal, could still be very sturdy. On the flip side, over-hardening the tip would make it brittle and prone to breaking, leading to complicated repairs. so the bending of pilum tips was probably more about cost efficiency than clever engineering. Similarly, the ancient world knew of the Iberian throwing spear soliferum. It was essentially a solid steel rod about 10 millimeters thick and 1.5 to 2 meters long. However, making one required as much metal as 3 pilums, which likely limited its popularity. In the 2nd century BCE, after the reforms of Gaius Marius, who famously equipped legionaries with throwing spears, there were supposedly pilums with tips attached using wooden rivets. After hitting a target, the fastening would fail, making it hard to throw the spear back. However, this design probably wasn't very popular. The only mention of such rivets comes from Plutarch. Polybius, on the other hand, argued that the durability of the fastening directly impacted the armor-piercing ability of the weapon. Livy and other authors, however, frequently describe soldiers picking up and reusing pilum. Legionary oaths even specified that soldiers could leave formation only to retrieve a thrown spear. Caesar himself mentioned the pilum being used in close combat against cavalry, though it was more commonly a throwing weapon hurled just before battle from a distance of 20 to 30 paces. According to the Gallic Wars, 10,000 pilum throws could kill 200 enemy soldiers, while another 800 would be wounded. That's an estimated 10% effectiveness, supposedly even better than early firearms volleys. I'd bet that on top of those casualties, thousands more had to deal with heavy spears stuck in their shields, making defensive maneuvers a nightmare. Since the throws happened just before engaging in close combat, they likely disrupted enemy lines, making them less cohesive. By the way, lighter pilums were better suited for close combat since a legionary needed to wield them with one hand. And close combat wasn't just about trying to hit the enemy's shield, it was about finding vulnerable spots and delivering precise thrusts. Some pilum shafts had peculiar wooden spheres. Many think these were weights, but archaeological evidence suggests they were wooden and served as hand grip stops. Historically, armies didn't rely solely on close combat. Some argue that the pilum might have been even more important in battle than the gladius. It's hard to verify that claim, though. By the late Roman Empire, the army shifted towards greater reliance on cavalry, and the pilum disappeared. Infantry, however, adopted short, heavy javelins called plumbata. These couldn't pierce shields but fell almost vertically, injuring enemies even through helmets. Soldiers could carry several of these compact darts, and their decent range allowed troops beyond the front lines to join in the attack. Most likely, these were effective against light cavalry. When they hit the ground, they acted like caltrops, slowing horses and hindering their movement. In 476 CE, Rome fell. It's hard to deny the immense contribution this state made to global civilization. But the fall probably didn't sadden most of its provincial inhabitants, since what we call civilized benefits were only accessible to a privileged few. For the majority, the best they could do was admire roads built with their own money, used mainly for transporting resources, taxes, and slaves. Against this backdrop, it's amusing how nearly every medieval European state, ruled by descendants of those once oppressed by Rome, claimed to be its successor. Cicero's words come to mind: "A slave doesn't desire freedom, a slave desires his own slave." That said, Rome's military expertise and soldier equipment were undeniably impressive. The pilum itself was a specialized weapon that greatly enhanced a legionary's capabilities. The evolution of warfare, and later the disappearance of large infantry armies, pushed the pilum into history's shadows. However, the development of armor in the late medieval period led to a return to the old idea. This eventually led to the auspice, which, while exclusively a close combat weapon, shared the pilum's purpose of penetrating defensive gear and closely resembled the pilum.